What would you do if you gave everything, your time, your sweat, your very soul, and still they told you that you didn't belong? Captain Sarah Lawson knew that pain well. She stood in the hangar, helmet under her arm, eyes fixed on the Apache helicopter she had dreamed of flying since childhood. To her, it wasn't just a machine, it was her destiny. She had studied every system, memorized every control, logged more hours than most of the men around her. By every measure, she was ready, and yet, when the assignment sheet went up, her name was missing. Again, the laughter started almost immediately. Her, fly the Apache, one soldier scoffed. Maybe she should stick to paperwork. Another joked. The words cut like knives, sharper because she'd heard them all before. Each rejection, each sneer, each closed door weighed heavy on her chest. She wanted to scream, to fight, to demand the chance she had earned. But instead, she stood tall, silent, her calm face hiding the storm inside. Because Sarah knew something they didn't. She wasn't just another pilot. She wasn't a risk, or a gamble, or a mistake waiting to happen. She was the one pilot who could tame the very beast they feared to trust her with. And that day, when doubt and ridicule filled the air, a man with stars on his shoulders was walking toward that hangar. A man who had seen the best pilots in the army. A man who was about to call Sarah Lawson something no one in that room would ever forget. The best pilot I've ever seen. Sarah Lawson's story did not begin in the cockpit of an Apache. It began years earlier, in a small town where the sound of engines roaring overhead lit a fire inside her that never went out. As a little girl, she would pause in the middle of chores, craning her neck to the sky whenever helicopters thundered past. While other kids dreamed of bicycles, toys, and music, Sarah dreamed of rotors slicing the clouds. Her father was a mechanic, his hands always blackened with grease, and he was the first to place a wrench in her hand. He showed her how machines had hearts, how they breathed through pistons, how every sound mattered. Her brother enlisted young, following the family path into service. But Sarah wanted more than service. She wanted to be where few had gone, doing what even fewer believed possible. She carried that dream through school, through sleepless nights of study, through obstacle after obstacle. When she finally made it to Army aviation training, she thought the hardest part was behind her. She was wrong. The hardest part wasn't learning to fly. It was convincing others she had the right to. The Apache helicopter was the crown jewel of combat aviation, brutal, fast, armed to the teeth. The men around her whispered about it with awe. But when Sarah spoke about it, when her eyes lit up at the mention of its systems, the whispers turned into smirks. They never said it outright, but the message was clear. The Apache wasn't meant for someone like her. She proved herself in simulators. She scored higher than most of her classmates. She knew the weapon systems, the countermeasures, the hydraulics, the fuel flow, every switch and dial. In evaluations, she rarely made mistakes, while others crashed and burned in training flight. But when assignments were given, her name was skipped. Again and again, she was told to wait her turn, or worse, reassigned to supporting roles. First, she thought it was coincidence. Then she realized it wasn't. She began to notice the sidelong glances, the muttered jokes. She saw how officers would hesitate before saying her name, how they softened their voices as if she might break. She saw how some of her peers stopped talking when she walked in, only to burst into laughter once she left. Still, she pressed on. Sarah wasn't a fighter with words. She was a fighter with action. She stayed late in the simulator rooms, running missions until her eyes ached from staring at screens. She studied the thick manuals when others went drinking. She memorized every procedure, every emergency checklist, until she could run them in her sleep. The Apache to her was no longer just a machine. It was almost alive, and she felt as though its heartbeat matched her own. There were a few who noticed. A janitor, pushing his mop past midnight, paused once to watch her in the simulator. Her voice was calm, steady, commanding as she guided the virtual bird through a storm of enemy fire. He shook his head, muttered, "Damn, that girl can fly," and left without saying more. Another trainee, a quiet man, often overshadowed by louder peers, once told her, "You fly better than all of them. Don't let them break you." But those voices were drowned by the chorus of doubt that always followed her. The day came when the Army scheduled a major training exercise. It was the kind of test that determined who was ready for the real thing. Squadrons would be assigned to fly, strategize, and carry out a mock combat operation. Every pilot dreamed of it. Sarah waited for her name to be called. She had earned it. It never came. Instead, she was told she would act as support, monitoring systems, taking notes, and reporting. She felt the sting in her chest, but she nodded and accepted it. On the outside, calm, On the inside, burning. The hangar buzzed with energy that morning. Young men strutted around in flight suits, laughing and boasting. "This is it," one of them said, slapping another on the back. "Time to show what real pilots look like." Their eyes flicked toward Sarah, and the smirk that followed was sharper than words. She stood quietly in the corner, helmet under her arm, watching the gleaming Apaches lined up under the fluorescent lights. She knew every inch of those machines, and yet, she wasn't allowed near them when the mission began. Sarah sat at her station, head down, listening to the chatter. It was chaotic. Pilots stumbled through commands. Maneuvers fell apart. She bit her tongue until it bled. She saw the mistakes before they happened: fuel miscalculations, poor formation, spacing, sloppy target locks. She wanted to speak up, but every time she tried, she was brushed aside. "We've got it, Lawson, just take notes." But then, something unexpected happened. One of the helicopters faltered mid-exercise. A trainee mishandled a maneuver, and the bird dropped dangerously low, alarms blaring. The hangar filled with tension. Officers barked orders, trainees shouted, but nothing worked. The exercise was on the verge of collapse. Sarah couldn't stay silent. She leaned forward, voice steady. "He's overcompensating. He's fighting the yacht. Tell him to ease the collective, not fight it." The officer in charge frowned, ready to dismiss her, but another voice cut in. "Do it," barked a man standing at the edge of the room. His uniform carried weight stars on the shoulders, a presence that silenced the noise in an instant. The order was relayed. The helicopter steadied. Disaster was avoided. All eyes turned to Sarah. She didn't flinch. She simply lowered her gaze back to the screens, heart pounding but face calm. The man with stars studied her. General Marcus Kane, known for his ruthless standards, known for tearing apart pilots who failed to measure up. He had seen everything in his long career, and now, his sharp eyes were fixed on the woman no one believed in. The exercise resumed, but Sarah's presence could no longer be ignored. She spotted errors before they spiraled, offered corrections that saved minutes, saved formations. First, officers hesitated to listen. Then, as her calls proved right again and again, they began relaying her words without question. The climax came when another helicopter faced a critical failure. Communications broke down, pilots panicked, the bird spun wildly, and the crew were seconds from disaster. Without hesitation, Sarah stood. "Let me take it," she said. The room froze. Officers stared, unsure, unwilling, but the general raised a hand. "Give her the controls." Whispers erupted, disbelief hanging in the air, but no one dared to argue. Sarah climbed into the simulator cockpit, strapped in, and placed her hands on the controls. The world narrowed to her and the machine. Calm, steady, precisely she guided the Apache back from the edge. The spinning stopped. The bird leveled out. A crisis turned into flawless recovery. Silence filled the hangar. Then the general spoke, his voice firm, leaving no room for doubt. "She's the best pilot I've ever seen." The words landed heavier than any command. The laughter died. The smirks vanished. The men who had mocked her could not meet her eyes. For the first time, Sarah Lawson stood not as the outsider, not as the doubted, but as the pilot she had always been. And though it was only the beginning of her real journey, in that moment, she knew she had finally broken through the walls built to keep her out. The general's words echoed in that hangar long after the training exercise ended. "She's the best pilot I've ever seen." For Sarah, it was like a door cracking open after years of being shut in her face. But cracks aren't the same as wider gates. Recognition from one man, even a general, didn't erase the doubt of everyone else. The officers who had dismissed her weren't eager to admit they had been wrong. Her fellow pilots still exchanged looks when she walked by, their smirks, now mixed with unease. The laughter had stopped, but whispers filled the silence. "She got lucky. He only said that to make a point. Let's see how she handles the real thing." Sarah knew their doubts hadn't vanished, had only changed shape. She was no longer the outsider to ignore. She was the target to beat. When she was finally assigned to fly in the next round of exercises, the resentment was sharp enough to cut. In the briefing room, she could feel eyes on her, daring her to make a mistake. One wrong move, one hesitation, and they would bury her under it. Her heart pounded as she strapped into the Apache for the first time in an official flight exercise. The weight of years pressed down on her shoulders. She whispered a promise to herself. "You've studied this machine your whole life. You know it. You belong here." The engines roared to life, the rotor blades thundering overhead, the smell of fuel, the vibration of power. It felt like coming home. But the mission wasn't hers alone. She was paired with another pilot, a man, who made his feelings about her painfully clear. "I'll take the lead," he said coldly, refusing to look her in the eye. "You just don't screw it up." Sarah swallowed her anger. This wasn't about pride. It was about proving she deserved to be here. The exercise began. The Apaches lifted into the sky in formation, slicing through the wind. Commands crackled. Through radios, targets lit up on sensors. Maneuvers shifted with precision, or at least, they were supposed to. Sarah's co-pilot rushed through calls, barking orders without thought. His arrogance turned into sloppiness, and soon their bird was out of sync with the others. Sarah spotted the mistake instantly. "Adjust heading, 20 degrees north. You're drifting into another flight path." "I've got it," he snapped, ignoring her. The warning came too late. Another Apache veered dangerously close. For a heartbeat, the sky was chaos. Multi-million-dollar war machines nearly colliding. Pilots shouted. Alarms blared. Sarah didn't wait. Her hands moved on instinct, correcting the yaw, stabilizing the angle, pulling them out of the near disaster. The collision was avoided, but the radios lit up with angry voices. "What the hell was that? Keep your bird in formation." Co-pilot cursed, blaming her under his breath. Sarah said nothing. She had saved them, but no one cared to admit it. To them, the mistake still belonged to her. Back on the ground, she expected discipline, maybe even removal. Instead, she was handed another assignment, quiet punishment disguised as duty. While others prepared for live-fire drills, she was sent to run equipment checks in the hangar. Hours turned into days. Sarah found herself elbow-deep in hydraulic lines and weapon mounts, her hands black with grease like her father's once had. Bennett felt like a step backward, like they were shoving her back into the shadows. Yet she refused to treat it as punishment. Every bolt she tightened, every system she inspected, only deepened her bond with the Apache. She wasn't just flying it, she was learning its bones. But the tension didn't fade. The more she excelled, the harder her peers tried to push her down. In the mess hall, conversations stopped when she walked in. Jokes surfaced louder, nastier. "Maybe the general needs glasses." Someone laughed. "Best pilot. She almost killed us up there." She ate in silence, her tray untouched, the laughter ringing louder than the clatter of dishes. Every insult was another weight added to her chest, but she carried it. Always calm on the outside, always fire on the inside. The next major test came in the desert, a full-scale combat simulation involving multiple squads, live ammunition, and strict evaluation. It wasn't just another drill, it was the exercise that determined who would move forward, who would be deemed ready for real missions. Sarah was assigned again, this time to a mixed team. The officers made it clear, this will show if she's truly as good as the general says, or if she's just another mistake waiting to happen. From the start, the mission was chaos. Sandstorms whipped across the desert, cutting visibility. Equipment failed. Radios cut out. The other pilots, overconfident and dismissive, stumbled through formation. Sarah, focused and precise, adjusted her calls, guiding her bird through the storm, but her warnings were ignored. When she spotted enemy mock targets flanking the formation, she called it out. "Left side, multiple hostiles. Adjust formation now." Her words were drowned out by another pilot's arrogant laugh. "She's chasing shadows. Stay on course." Moments later, simulated fire struck two Apaches, knocking them out. The mission teetered on collapsed. Sarah's hands tightened on the controls. Her blood surged, heart steady. "We need to regroup." Now this time, they listened. Not out of respect, but out of desperation. With calm, commanding precision, she guided what was left of the squad through the storm, picking off targets, saving the mission from total failure. When they landed, the officers couldn't ignore what had happened. Without Sarah's calls, the entire mission would have been lost. Yet the praise was faint, grudging. "You held it together," one said curtly. "But don't let it go to your head." Sarah nodded, swallowing the bitter taste. Even in victory, they couldn't admit the truth, but deep down she knew the tide was shifting. The harder they tried to bury her, the brighter she shined. Each insult was fuel. Each rejection, another reason to push harder. And somewhere above them all, the general watched, silent, observant, waiting. He had seen sparks before, but now he was seeing fire. Sarah didn't know it yet, but the storm of resistance she faced was only preparing her for the moment that would define everything. The desert was still in Sarah's lungs the morning the real test arrived. Not a drill, not a simulation, but an emergency call that lit the base like a spark in dry brush. A transport helicopter had gone down in hostile training grounds. Flames, rising into the sky. A rescue team was needed immediately. The mission was dangerous, low visibility, live fire zones, time running out. Only the best pilots were cleared to fly. Sarah was not on that list. She stood in the hangar, helmet under her arm while names were read out. Every one of the men who had sneered at her doubted her. Her pulse hammered as she waited, but her name never came. Fall back to standby, the officer barked at her. We can't afford mistakes out there. It was like a blade to her chest. But then, across the hangar, she caught sight of the general. He stood with arms folded, watching her carefully, eyes sharp with something unreadable. Minutes later, chaos erupted. One of the assigned pilots went down before takeoff, injured during pre-check. Suddenly, there was a gap on board without a pilot. Officers scrambled, shouting for replacements. Before anyone else could speak, the general's voice cut through. She fly it. Silence. Heads turned. Faces twisted in disbelief, but no one dared to challenge him. The order stood. Sarah's heart thudded as she climbed into the Apache. Her hands shook as they brushed over the controls, but the moment the engine roared to life, the nerves hardened into steel. This was the chance she had bled for. The squad lifted off, slicing through the storm toward the downed helicopter. The desert stretched endless below, heat waves shimmering like ghosts. Sarah's bird fell into formation, her senses sharper than they had ever been. The mission turned grim fast. Hostile fire cracked against the sky, tracer rounds carving streaks of light. Radios exploded with shouts, orders, panic. Pilots veered off course, trying to dodge too much, losing their bearings. Sarah saw it unraveling. If they kept stumbling, they'd never reach the transport in time. Regroup, tight pattern, follow my lead. She called. Her voice was strong, commanding, but hesitation hung in the silence that followed. No one wanted to obey her. No one wanted to admit she was right. Then another Apache went down, smoke trailing into the sand. The squad was one heartbeat away from disaster. That was when the general's voice cut across the comms, steady and sharp. You heard her. She's in command now. The words rang like thunder. For the first time, the squadron fell in line behind Sarah, and with them at her back, she flew like she had been waiting her whole life for this moment. Through the storm, through fire and chaos, she wove their formation back together. Enemy fire became obstacles. She danced around. Targets fell one after another. Precision strikes guided by her commands. When the transport finally came into view, flames licking at its hull, the squad had no doubts left. They trusted her completely, moving as one under her lead. Sarah angled, her bird low, hovering close enough for the rescue crew to drop. She covered them with flawless maneuvers, shielding their path, guiding every step until survivors were pulled out of the wreckage. The mission ended in victory, not just survival, but triumph. Every life saved was because she had refused to falter. Back at the base, the hangar was silent when they landed. For once, no smirks, no whispers, just the heavy, undeniable truth, pressing down on every witness. Sarah climbed out of the cockpit, helmet under her arm. Sweat streaked her face, but her eyes burned with a fire no one could deny. The general stepped forward, his boots echoing against the floor. He stopped in front of her, and in that moment, the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Then, with the weight of the entire base watching, he lifted his hand in a crisp salute. That it wasn't casual, it wasn't symbolic, it was respect, and one by one the others followed. Officers, soldiers, pilots, all, those who had laughed, doubted, ridiculed, saluted her, not because they were ordered to, not because they feared the general, but because she had earned it. Sarah's throat tightened as she returned the salute. For years she had carried the weight of their doubt like a chain. In that single moment, it broke. She was no longer the janitor's daughter sneaking into hangars, no longer the woman whispered about in mess halls. She was exactly what she had always been, one of the finest pilots the sky had ever seen, and no one would ever forget it. The base was quiet that night. The echoes of the day's chaos still hung in the air, but now it was silence that pressed on everyone's chest. Soldiers walked slower, their eyes catching Sarah differently than before, no longer mocking, numbered, longer dismissive. There was weight in their gaze, now respect. Sarah sat alone near the edge of the runway, her helmet resting on the concrete beside her. The desert wind tugged gently at her hair, carrying the smell of jet fuel and scorched earth. For the first time in years, she felt light, not because the fight was over, it never truly ended, but because the battle she thought she would always fight alone had shifted. She thought of her father, the man who had once stood at this very base, working long hours as a janitor, mopping floors most officers wouldn't even notice. He used to tell her, Respect is never given, it's proven. Earn it when they least want to give it. Those words had lived inside her like a secret compass, and today, they had guided her straight through fire. The memory stung and soothed at the same time. She wished he had been alive to see it the moment she returned from the skies, with not just survivors, but with her dignity restored. The salute of a general had been a gift, but the truth was deeper. She had proven herself not through titles or ranks, but through actions no one could deny. As she sat there, she heard footsteps. A group of young cadets, wide-eyed, stopped a few feet away. They didn't laugh or whisper. One of them, a girl who looked barely old enough to wear the uniform, finally spoke. "Ma'am, will you teach us?" The question struck Sarah harder than any insult ever had. Teach her the one they had once shoved aside. For a moment she could barely breathe. Then she smiled softly, nodding. "I'll teach you everything I know." The cadets lingered a moment longer, as if soaking in her presence, before retreating. With quiet respect, Sarah watched them go, realizing something profound. Her fight hadn't just been for herself. Every insult, every dismissal, every closed door she had endured, had carved a path for those who would come after her. When the general approached later, his expression was calm, but his eyes carried something rare pride. He didn't speak in grand speeches. Instead, he simply said, "You fly the way soldiers dream of flying. Don't ever let anyone clip your wings again." Sarah held his gaze, nodding with gratitude. "Thank you, sir, for believing in me when no one else would." The general shook his head. "No, you made me believe. You made them believe. That's the difference." And with that, he walked away, leaving Sarah to the stars stretching wide above the desert. She tilted her head back, watching the night sky shimmer. For so long it had been her escape, the place she dreamed of flying when life tried to hold her down. Now it wasn't just a dream, it was hers. The base would never be the same after that day. The men who once dismissed her spoke differently in the halls. The cadets looked at her not as an outsider, but as proof that strength had no gender, no label, no limitation. Sarah's journey had not erased the scars of her struggle, but it had transformed them into something greater. They were no longer reminders of pain, they were proof of resilience. And as she sat there on the runway, the wind brushing against her cheek like a whisper, she understood the lesson her father had meant all along. Respect earned in the face of doubt becomes unshakable. Sarah closed her eyes, the hum of distant engines fading into the night. Tomorrow she would fly again, not to prove herself not anymore, but to lead, to inspire, and to remind every soul who doubted that the sky belongs to those brave enough to claim it. If Sarah's story moved you, then remember her fight is not just hers, it belongs to every soldier, every woman, every person, who was ever told they weren't enough. It belongs to those who carry scars of doubt, yet rise anyway. Respect should never have to be begged for. It should be recognized, honored, and protected. And stories like this remind us of the sacrifice and courage behind every uniform. If you believe the world needs to hear more stories like Sarah's, then help us keep them alive. Share this video with someone who needs inspiration. Leave a comment with your thoughts, because your voice matters, and if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel so that together, we continue to honor those who fight not just on battlefields, but in the quiet wars of respect and dignity.